All right, today we are jumping into one of the most foundational stories in Western culture, the serpent in the Garden of Eden. We all think we know this story inside and out, but what if the original text, the actual Hebrew, tells a completely different story? Let's find out.
So let's just start with a question that's going to flip this whole narrative on its head. What if the character we've always been told is the Bible's #1 bad guy wasn't actually a bad guy? What if he was actually the first shadow of the story's ultimate hero?
You know the story we've heard 1,000 times, right? There's this evil serpent, who everyone says is Satan, who tempts humanity, causes the fall, and then gets cursed by God to crawl on his belly for all time. It's a pretty straightforward tale of good versus evil. Case closed. But, as we're about to see, the original text is so much more complex, and frankly, more interesting than that.
Okay, so to really figure this out, we have to do something crucial. We've got to peel back all those layers of translation, all the centuries of tradition, and get right back to the source. We're going to dig into the original Hebrew words of Genesis to see what this text actually says about this creature.
Okay, first things first. Look at the very first word used to describe the serpent in Genesis chapter 3. The Hebrew word is arum, and look at what it means. Subtle, perceptive, shrewd, prudent. Notice what's missing? There's nothing in there about being evil, wicked, or demonic. This is the language of wisdom, of being sharp. So right from the get-go, the story introduces a uniquely perceptive creature, not a malicious one.
Now this next part is a real game changer. Let's talk about the famous curse. Tradition tells us that the serpent was demoted, cursed to be beneath all the other animals. But the Hebrew word used here is mikol, and it actually means more than or above. The text literally says the serpent is cursed above all livestock. And think about it. What are livestock in the Torah? They're sacrificial animals. This isn't a demotion. It's a kind of elevation, setting the serpent apart in a special, symbolic way.
And that's the perfect way to put it. This whole event puts a completely new spin on things. It's not about being punished or humiliated. This is an appointment. God is singling out the serpent, giving it a unique divine purpose that places it symbolically above the entire sacrificial system.
Okay, let's keep going because once you see that this was an appointment, a whole pattern just clicks into place. It's like a three-part story that weaves its way all through the Old and New Testaments, and it all starts right here in the garden.
So check this out. First, in Genesis, the serpent is elevated into its special symbolic role. Then, fast forward a few centuries to the book of Numbers. The Israelites are dying from snake bites. And what does God tell Moses to do? He doesn't say sacrifice a lamb. He says make a bronze serpent and lift it up on a pole for healing. And that brings us right to Jesus, who completes the whole pattern.
I mean, listen to his own words. Jesus directly connects his crucifixion to Moses lifting up that serpent in the wilderness. And you have to think about that. There's just no way Jesus would compare his own act of salvation to a symbol of pure evil or Satan. He's validating this pattern, confirming the serpent's role as a preordained symbol of healing and life.
Okay, so that brings us to the big one, Genesis 3:15. This is probably the most famous, most debated verse in the whole chapter. And with this new understanding, we can finally crack the code of who is really being crushed in this prophecy. So, who gets crushed? The traditional answer is simple, right? The seed of the woman, Jesus, comes and crushes the head of the serpent, who is Satan. But is that what the text actually says? Because this is where the traditional reading really starts to fall apart. Let's look at the specific Hebrew verb here. It's shup, and it means to crush. Genesis 3:15 says the serpent's head will be crushed. Now hang on to that thought, and let's ask, where else does the Bible talk about someone being crushed by the will of God? Well, it takes us straight to Isaiah 53, the famous prophecy of the suffering Messiah. And what does it say? It pleased the Lord to crush him. And this right here is the absolute heart of the argument. The text is incredibly specific. In Genesis 3:15, only one figure gets crushed, the serpent. Not the woman, not her seed, only the serpent's head is crushed. And then Isaiah gives us the only other example of God crushing someone, the Messiah. So if Genesis says the serpent is crushed, and Isaiah says the Messiah is crushed, well, the text is drawing a straight line. It's identifying the crushed serpent as a symbol of the crushed Messiah. So what about the bruised heel? We're always told it refers to Christ's physical heel being wounded on the cross. But wait a minute. If the Messiah is the one being crushed, he can't also be the one doing the striking. The text points to something else. That bruised heel belongs to us, to humanity.
It's a symbol of our foundation, our stability, our footing in the world, which is now fragile because of mortality. This lines up perfectly with imagery in the book of Daniel, where human kingdoms are pictured as a giant statue with feet of clay, a fragile foundation, ready to be shattered.
So you see, when you start putting all these textual details together, a completely new and remarkably consistent picture emerges. It's a pattern that was laid out right there on the first few pages of the Bible, pointing all the way to the cross.
Let's just lay it all out, side by side. The traditional view sees the serpent as a villain, the curse is a humiliation, and the crushed one as a defeated Satan. But the textual reading gives us a wisdom symbol, an elevation or appointment, and a crushed Messiah who fulfills what the serpent foreshadowed, while humanity's foundation is what's shown to be fragile. It's a completely different story, one of profound foreshadowing, not just a simple story of good versus evil.
But hold on, we're not quite done. There's one last incredible piece of evidence that adds another layer to this, and it all comes down to a single number, 358. Now, what could that possibly mean?
Well, in the ancient Jewish practice of gematria, every Hebrew letter also has a numerical value. So you can calculate the number of a word. And this is where it gets pretty wild. The Hebrew word for serpent, Nahash, adds up to 358. And the Hebrew word for Messiah, Mashiach, also adds up to, you guessed it, 358, the exact same number. Now, this isn't proof on its own, but it's a stunning numerical echo of the very textual pattern we've been uncovering.
So we end up right back where we started, with a question. If the serpent isn't the Bible's first villain, but is instead its first shadow of the cross, a symbol of wisdom, appointed to be crushed to prefigure redemption, how does that change the way we read everything that comes after?